In this video, I'm going to go over how to use a depth map from Cinema 4D to create fog in After Effects. This is another form of depth of field, or perspective. This is called aerial perspective. If you've come from a painting background, you're probably familiar with the term. To create this, what I've done is created a simple city model in Cinema 4D. And it's basically a grid of cubes with a random effect applied to change the Y scale. I've got a blue sky background, and I've added in a key light and a blue ambient light and some ambient occlusion to give me that sky effect. Because the purpose of this demonstration is to go over how to add that fog, I'm not going to be going over how to build this city. So start by finding a city model, creating a city model, and set up your first camera view. Next, add a camera object to your scene. We need to add a camera object because we're going to be playing with the front blur and rear blur settings. So take your camera, and at frame 0, go ahead and record its position. I'm just doing a 30 frame animation so that I can render this nice and quickly. Actually, I think I'll just go with 15. And at frame 15, dolly your camera in a bit and maybe tilt up if you want to, and press record. So now I've got a nice simple 15 frame animation, or at least I thought it did. Let's see. I'm going to go back to frame 0 here. Dolly my camera back out, and okay, so here's where I went wrong. I thought that I had my camera active. I did not. So I'm going to select my camera to make it my active camera. Frame 0, press record, frame 15, move forward, tilt up, and press record. So there you go. We've now got a nice 15 frame camera animation, something nice and simple. The next thing we need to do is set up our render for depth of field. So go into your render settings, and I'm going to turn off some of these settings that I've already set up. For example, multipass is probably off. Go to your Save tab and name your file something meaningful. Usually I use the same name as my file name. Change your format to QuickTime Movie just so it's easy to work with. And include 24-bit dithering. If you would like, you can turn on compositing project file. Do that for After Effects, include 3D data. And then you also want to activate multipass, and this is very important for working with the depth pass. So turn on multipass and add a depth pass. So click on multipass and choose depth. And in your output settings, I'm just rendering this out at NTSC D1 widescreen square pixel. You can use HD if you'd like. And render out all frames. So now, if I press render, I've got an image that looks like this. I don't have any depth just yet. And if I click on my render to picture viewer button, it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite a file, and I say that's fine. If you click on the layer tab right here, you should see two layers, one that says background and one that says depth. Go ahead and click on single pass, and that'll allow you to see your depth pass. So here's our background image, here's our depth pass, and the areas that are white are those that are closest to the camera, the areas that are black are those that are furthest from our camera. Let's play around with the settings in our camera in order to get a better depth pass. Basically, you want the nearest object in your scene to be white and the furthest one to be black, or actually vice versa. So to get that effect, what I'm going to do is take my camera and I'm going to set the target distance to 0, or basically you want to drag this front plane so that it is in line with the closest object in your view. For now, target distance of 0 is just nice and easy. And then turn on rear blur. What that does is it gives you a back plane. You want to drag that back plane to the furthest object in your scene that you would ever need to not have fog in it. or not be completely enveloped in fog. So I'm just going to drag this to the back end of my scene. So generally from the target, you can use a distance of 0, and rear blur, just drag that all the way to the end of your scene. Then go into your render settings again, and if you go to your Save tab, make sure that your multipass image also has a name. I'm going to call this city depth as well. And there's one thing that's a little complicated about this. If we just use an 8-bit depth channel and render this out, what you're going to see is that we get banding in our colors, because we've only got 256 possible depths that we can represent with white to black. So if we change our bit depth here for our image from 8-bit to 16-bit, we'll be able to get a much better fog effect. So instead of a QuickTime movie, I'm going to use an OpenEXR, which is actually 32 bits, which is going to give me a ton of detail in my depth pass. So normally you want to avoid really high bit depths because it just, it increases file size pretty dramatically. But when you're working with a depth pass, it is really nice to have that extra information. So just to review, output, NTSC D1 widescreen square pixel, frame range, all frames. Save tab, I'm using the same thing as my file name. I've got regular image and multipass image turned on. I've got an OpenEXR and 32-bit depth. And for my multipass, I've got the depth channel activated, and anti-aliasing I've got set to best in animation. Next, I'm going to render this out. Now, this might take a second. Again, we've got our background and our depth channel here. And while this is happening, we can just switch over to After Effects. In fact, I'm just going to render out another couple frames and kill this. It's going to ask me if I want to stop, and I say yes. It's going to save out my pictures. And then I'm going to go into After Effects and go ahead and create a new comp. Double-click in your project bin to import, and go ahead and import your citydepth.move file that you rendered out. And that is your image. So I'm just importing that into my timeline. You can scroll through, I've got a few frames of animation. Next, I'm going to import in that depth pass that we rendered out. And that's going to be a series of EXR files. So find the one labeled citydepth underscore depth with the zeros afterwards. And make sure that you have OpenEXR sequence activated and choose Open. Now drag this footage onto a layer just above your move. What you get is this. Notice all of that visual detail. Next up, take your city depth pass here. Oh, excuse me. Next up, we're going to add in a fog layer. And you can do that by going to Layer, New, Solid. I'm going to make that sort of a medium gray and choose OK. I'm now going to use my city depth pass here as an alpha channel, basically, for my solid. So I'm going to change my solid here. I'm going to adjust its track matte. If you don't see this column, what you can do is click on Toggle Switches Modes until you do. Change track matte to Luma matte, city depth, and you get something like this. We've got sort of an instant fog. It's nice and fun, easy to work with. And if you want to control the nature of the fog, just bring up the curves effect in your effects and presets by typing in curves and drag that onto your city depth. Now when you play around with your curves, you're completely affecting the placement of your fog. And you can see how I'm doing this when I turn my layer back on. Anything that's black will not be foggy. Anything that's white will be completely foggy. So you can make a really dense fog like that. Now notice that we're getting some banding here, and that's because we're working with an 8-bit depth. If I go to my project tab and change from 8-bit color to 16 or 32-bit, notice that I no longer have that banding. It looks much better. So there you go. That is the basics of how to do a fog in After Effects using a depth channel from Cinema 4D.